All right, we're live.
We're back.
And we're back.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Eldon. I am the managing editor of Techcrunch, which is the Techcrunch premium product focused on information startup founders need. One of the topics is we cover is remote work, and we've been a remote first team for a decade. So I have a very personal interest in this matter. I'm in my home office right now. And with me are three experts on the topic in various ways. And today we're just going to start out by hearing from each of them about their backgrounds and how they know about remote work and what the future is looking like, not just with the coronavirus, but with everything else happening in the world today and the direction the world's going for work. So Katrina, you work at Hired. Tell me about your view on remote work now and your perspective on this.
Sure. Remote work, how we came across it at Hired, and a little bit of a Hired, just for a tech platform that matches tech talent with some of the world's most innovative companies. And so employer brand and how our companies think about how to attract talent has been a focus for Hired. And when it comes to remote work, initially it was discussed really from our customers, the community that we've built. It was about managing attrition because the demand for tech workers far outstripped the supply. Obviously, with what's going on right now, there's been kind of this acceleration to even more thinking about remote work. But it was really in how do we get the best talent and they don't have to live at HQ has been the topic for a lot of our customers.
Great. Darren, you have been a writer for a long time on the internet, so you in some ways this may feel native to you, but you also now work at a unicorn startup that is focused on this as well squarely and is remote first, and you're getting quite famous about it. But for those who don't know, Darren Murph, head of remote at Gitlab.
Yeah, no, thanks, Eric. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so I'm head of remote at Gitlab, the world's largest all-remote company. So we currently have over 1,200 people in over 65 countries with no offices at all. So even the executives don't work in an office. If you go to Google Maps and try to find Gitlab, you'll be very sad to end up at a UPS store, which is where we get our taxes. But yeah, it's been an amazing journey here, scaling and understanding how you get 1,200 plus people across 6 continents to gel as a team and to work well as a team and to really embrace asynchronous workflows. It's truly, I feel like it's the future of work. So I've worked across the spectrum of remote for my entire career, so over 14 years. You alluded to it, but I was at Engadget for almost 8 years as a writer and traveling all over the world, covering events, covering conferences. And the news business is one of the most remote friendly businesses in the world because almost no news happens in the office. You either can do it from where it's happening or from anywhere that you have an internet connection. And seeing the evolution of technology that has brought us to today is so much easier to work remotely today than it was when I started this whole thing. But I think what is happening with COVID-19 has accelerated the global recognition of remote by at least 5, maybe 10 years. And it has put companies in a situation where they just have to get real with themselves that they're now a remote company. And even if they go back into their offices the way they always were, if they have multiple offices or they're operating a business across multiple floors, they have people that are remote to each other. And so now is the time to implement remote first practices and build that remote infrastructure. Because some part of their business is going to go remote. Even if they maintain offices, there'll be people working on planes and in hotels and in different offices. It's time to get it right. And it's an exciting time to see this thing moving forward.
Great. And Nate, you are building your own software as well to solve remote first. Tell us about your journey a little bit too.
Yeah, so I'm Nate. I'm founder of Maven Studios and Buildstack. So Maven is an all-remote design and engineering company. And so we work with a lot of California startups and larger companies. But we've always felt like remote was the future, and we've been working remote, in some form for the last 10 years. And so what Buildstack is a software that we use internally that we are now helping other agencies and services companies with, where it's basically a business in a box. And so it allows them to remotely run their entire operations without having to have a lot of people in the office. And so, I've been lucky enough to work with Katrina, and I connected with Darren pre-crisis, really talking about remote. And, I feel a lot like you, right? Like this is normal, but not normal. We've, had a hard right turn into e-commerce, work from home, telemedicine, everything remote. And so it's just a really interesting time. Like Darren said, we accelerated, 0 to 10 years perhaps down the road in a couple of weeks.
Great. And Katrina, you had pulled some data from Hired that we were starting to talk about a minute ago. Just for everyone who's listening in, let's bring that out. It was pretty interesting stuff. It sounded like there are big regional differences.
Yes. So on Hire's platform, we have roughly 3 million candidates have ever, tech candidates have ever found jobs using Hired. And so we looked at the data, and as a whole, 64% of these candidates that are active on our platform are open to remote work, which is kind of nice to see. We always suspected it, but we looked at it pretty deeply recently. And when it comes to regional differences, what we're seeing is, in Denver, Austin, DC, Paris, Chicago, Toronto, and Boston, tech talent is more willing to work remote than, in the larger cities. That makes sense because, in New York, in San Francisco, there's just a lot of companies with HQs still. So our data kind of supports the fact that, remote work is becoming bigger in, what we call the secondary tech hubs.
So a question for all of you on that point. One of the claims of many companies who do remote first from the start is that it's easier to hire talent. How long do you think that will stay the case now that everyone's doing it? I mean, let's say a year or two from now, the world starts going back to normal. Lots of people decide they like the office again. Walk me through what's going to happen.
I can take a stab at that. So I think a couple of things are going to play out. Currently, being able to hire remotely from anywhere in the world is a massive competitive advantage if your company does it. But I think that competitive advantage will diminish over time. And in fact, at Gitlab, we hope to help perpetrate that diminishing, because we believe that if more opportunity is spread, there are more remote first and all remote companies, the rising tide will lift all boats. So that will enable and actually encourage more companies to pay more no matter where they are. So it's going to help everyone. I think another thing that's going to happen from this is there will be Googlers and Amazoners that work the next 3 months from home, and then they're going to be asked to come back to the office. And they're going to pause and say, wait a minute, these are all the things I was able to do not commuting. I got my job done perfectly fine. How about no? And especially with those with families, they're going to look at what they're paying for rent. They're going to look at how difficult it is to get in a good school district. They're going to look at how many square feet they're dealing with, and they're going to hit the road. And so I actually think for rural and small to mid-sized towns, there could be an influx of people that, if Seattle or San Francisco is not their home anyway, they're going to get out of there. They're going to go seeking a higher quality of life and just take their career with them. I think one of the biggest things to happen from this movement is the decoupling of geography and work. And it has made sense to people in the remote space forever, but now on a massive scale, people are going to start to understand, a location doesn't necessarily have to be tied to work. You look at places like Tulsa and Vermont, who have already started thinking about how can we build small towns and cities to accommodate people that are coming in that don't necessarily want to work here at a high rise, but just want a great place to live. It's completely reshaping how you think of building a municipality. And it may take a little bit of time, but that motion is going to start when this is all said and done.
It's super interesting. And I agree. My wife works at a big tech company. She's a researcher. a lot of people are a little stressed out about having to work from home. And she was on a call talking to her manager. She was like, I'm living my best life. Like, I love not commuting. Like, this is great. I think we're lucky to be used to it, but the genie's out of the bottle now. Like, why am I not allowed to do this all the time? Like,
well, let's talk about the issues that companies that are used to having in like office space are going through right now, and you probably hear about this the most, Katrina, from people who are maybe trying to adjust towards a remote hiring approach, but that's not really the culture. Like, what do you hear from your clients who are trying to make that transition?
I have a couple of examples. I mean, I feel like it's a journey for a lot of the companies that we work with. So initially, because we do support the remote work on our platform, what we see is, and we have a company in Amsterdam where they did all of their hiring out to London and they started relocating everyone en masse. And then eventually they started figuring out that, hey, is it worth it and is it necessary? And there's some cultural implications there. Maybe it's better to do onboarding that way, maybe not. But to, what we were just talking about, some of that is, disappearing. And this was, a company that started doing this a few years ago. There's another company in our community, and they went public last year. So it was quite a few years for them on their journey. And they started off wanting to hire just outside of America and just pure, we need more developers to work on our technology. And so what they tapped into was hiring candidates from South Africa, but it was hard to get everyone visas in America right away. And so they worked the Commonwealth locations and it was just easier visa constraints. And then when that worked, they said, okay, well, we could actually hire from all of Europe, whether it's in Paris or Berlin, and move everyone to London first or to Canada first before moving them to the US. And then eventually they ended up opening up offices there and just supporting. So you see this trend of building offices around, continents and countries that allow you to hire more flexibly. Other companies, do this through acquisition. So they acquired a company, Champaign, Illinois, because that made sense. Fast forward to, go ahead.
If I may, it sounds like you're saying that, they're incorporating a lot of physical offices, but they're not just having a big HQ downtown or like in a suburban office park. They are like having a bunch of little offices that people may or may not be going into every day. And that's, the HQ might be pretty small when it comes down to it in terms of the real estate.
That's right. And then more recently, I would say over this past year, what we're seeing is companies just going fully remote teams and distributed teams, no office. It's perceived to be just additional overhead anyway. And the gains of having a physical space just don't outweigh the costs. And so that's been interesting. So we're starting to see that shift. And this is, well before, the set of current events.
And Eric, the thing that you're going to see stacked on top of that, because that's been a reality for a long time, but what you now are seeing stacked on top of that is going fully remote, going all remote significantly de-risks your business. Because any company headquartered in London,
rent bill.
They never saw Brexit coming. So now you have this socioeconomic thing that has nothing to do with your business that now permanently impacts your business forever. And in SFO is a great example. United built a huge manufacturing hub at SFO. They had no idea that the socioeconomics of that place would change so significantly that now, compared to their biggest competitors, they have to pay people significantly more to work on airplanes there. And this crisis has shown that if you had a hub in one of the tier 3 areas where this was breaking out, you are more impacted than other companies. So being all remote now actually makes you less susceptible to global events. And you don't have to put in those plans, those like backup plans. They can be a lot more thin when you don't have to plan for something happening to a specific geography.
Well, so let's take the example of United Airlines. Like, they're always going to have planes to work on and planes to fly around and put different places, right? So that stuff is not remote in any like sort of like internet sort of way, right? So let's say there are plenty of companies like, we're all in the software business, but our world revolves around people who do things in real life. For companies that are always going to have a real life component. I mean, and Nate, you work with a lot of these kind of companies, I think.
So we have an interesting mix. I would say, a lot of them obviously are software, but for example, we have one client who manufactures car parts, and so an input into that is obviously like steel and other materials from China. And so now, if you're thinking about that particular type of business, they're getting hit with disruptions on the supply side, but also the demand side, and like how is this impacting their business? And over this whole time, they're taking everything to e-commerce. And so, it's just this huge shift in the way that they're thinking about things amongst a, massive shock to both sides of their business.
But whereas like, just for the kind of a business like that, where it's like, it's going to have logistics software to manage where it's buying the steel and, all of the parts. But like, does that company now still have a headquarters like in the Midwest or wherever? Like, are
they are primarily distributed. So they have like a small headquarters, but their, whole team is in Los Angeles, and they're not super large.
And they just have factories or contracting with in different parts of the world, put it all together.
And it's the kind of the same process an Apple would follow, for example. There's just a series of manufacturers and suppliers that are putting things together for them.
And so you see manufacturing becoming more like every layer becoming distributed and woven into this remote framework as well.
I think so. And I think if you think about, we've been talking and working remote for such a long time, I think a lot of us have probably thought about, malls are dying, retail is dying. The way commerce works now is completely changing. And so I think the entire, economy in theory could go totally e-commerce and totally remote, where it's just a, distributed model of consumption versus we go to Target to buy things. And I think that affects how people think about work and how they're going to work in the future.
So I have my next question ready. Unless you wanted to say anything on that, Darren. Anyway.
I was just going to say Amazon Prime. After that, it's weird for me to wait more than a day for something. And I just think about, I already barely go out to buy anything. So yeah, I think that is the future,
So in the remote, one of the comments that I've seen, Techcrunch has been doing, Extracrunch has been doing a series of interviews with CEOs of remote first teams. I'm sure we'll get to you guys soon. Talking to you here now. But one of the comments that I saw is that like where one of those CEOs, I think it was the Mattermost CEO, he basically said that one of the areas in the employee surveys that they did see an issue was that employees didn't feel like they had a best friend at work. And I think the question now is the survey was really trying to get at was like, do you have friends at work? Do you have like that sort of social connection or like personal connection? And it sounded like, they did have things that were good, but, like, I know what the standard response is. We have events occasionally, right? And people show up and hang out and everything. And you have offsites or onsites or whatever you want to call them when it's remote first. And, it seems like there's a much bigger question of how do humans like actually have the same kind of interactions that we could in person remotely, and it seems like no one really has that answer, and everyone just talks about virtual worlds.
I think that's an super interesting question, and something like actually one of our developers who is a really good friend of mine that we've developed this remote friendship. He is Katrina might actually know him, Luca, and he's in Milan.
Oh yes, yes.
He's been locked down almost 3 weeks now. And we have an international wine trade. So we send California and Italian wines back and forth. He sends us Parmesan. We have made liquor remotely together. So like, the other night we drank an Italian liqueur Mirto together and commiserated about the coming self-isolation. So I think it comes down to just like, how do you, put time into building relationships? And yes, perhaps it's harder through video and not face-to-face, but I think at the end of the day, like, you can certainly have meaningful remote relationships, although, I can see where people come from. I don't have a best friend at work. Like, I can see, especially people new to working remotely, like how that can go.
I was talking to a customer over lunch, and it was interesting what her company has done. And it's only been about weeks since, and really a day since the shelter in place for those of us, here in Silicon Valley. They're even last week they did a virtual happy hour. So just as it was a tradition for them at their company on a regular basis, they just did it virtually, and they thought that was pretty cool. They did something similar over lunchtime where, because I guess at their office you can bring in dogs. And so everyone brought their dog onto Zoom, and that was kind of cool. So that got me thinking, and that's something that I want to implement with the marketing team here at Hired, where we could still kind of connect in perhaps similar ways. But I thought that was pretty cool to hear.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think a lot of those surveys right now come from hybrid remote teams where you have a subset of the company that works outside of the office and then a subset that works in the office. And the real problem with that is the people that are remote always know what they're missing out on. They know that they are missing out on the physical contact of the people in the office. Now, this is going to start to change if you ask an all remote team, because at Gitlab, we do not have this problem because we're all on the level playing field. But I do get it that it is an issue at hybrid teams. And I have kind of 2 points on that. One is, if we're really getting to the point where we're grasping for reasons to complain about remote, it's like, oh, I can't make friends at work. It pales in comparison to the long list of benefits, like the 3 hours of commute you get back every day to be better friends with your family. I mean, we could just start there. Yeah. It's like when you really start stacking up the pros and cons, it's like, are we really going there? The other thing is about a remote team, it's not going to happen spontaneously. You aren't going to have people just walking by each other on the way to the restroom. So the people team needs to be responsible for being intentional about setting up meeting points. So we have a marketing call every month. It's a virtual show and tell. People can bring something, show to the webcam. We had someone bring, it was like a hook with a feather on it. And we have people all over the world like, what is that? And she said, I build my own flies. I love to go fly fishing. So then we have this massive cultural exploration of what is fly fishing. You can't do that at a co-located space. So in some ways, I think you can get even more intimate bonds built over Zoom when you are intentional about setting those things up. Another thing that we do is it's called juice box chats. So we have coffee chats for adults, but then we set up juice box chats. So this is particularly germane when all the kids are home, that if we have a meeting and it ends and everybody has an extra 30 minutes, just leave your webcam on and your kids can just come meet other kids from all over the world. This is something that's fundamentally impossible in a co-located space. So it's actually even better. So those wheels are starting to turn. Like, I get the question. It's because you're trying to copy and paste. Yeah, you can't literally copy the water cooler in a virtual environment, but you don't want to do that. You want to look for new ways to connect with people. Set up virtual water cooler sessions, and then just talk about the same things that you always would. I don't think it's that difficult, but I come from a remote world. I get it that if you've never done it before, you do need to kind of lean on your people team to put some intentionality behind it.
So I guess the way it is seen to me with Techcrunch, which went from like a, very regionally focused, very casual sort of blog, to a bigger team owned by a corporation covering world news from around the world. And it's like we had the news to tie us together. And as I think one of you mentioned, news is one of them. Darren, you mentioned is like news is a very natural thing to connect people. Just having Slack channels. We use some other products as well. I think everyone seems to cobble together their favorite messaging products, more than one of them. it's like, it's okay for people to have a bunch of like private channels. And I've been at companies that tried to enforce that different ways. I guess what I found is like giving people space to like make friends naturally, but then having like some, sort of open like town forum spaces that are designed for people to say whatever they want or to be fun. I'm talking about like a team that's not huge, right? 30 Techcrunch staff is not, editorial staff is like 30 people, right? It's very small. We just write a lot. So it's, so it's like we have enough to bond on, but we also have all of these events that occur. Like there's, Disrupt every year. I mean, we'll see, this year it's going to be probably partly remote. We'll see. But there's all of these things that make it easier. But I guess what I found is that like you have to create a lot of casual spaces. And if I like the Zoom camera is a good example of that, the Juicebox cam, but it's like there needs to be a time where like no one is supposed to do anything but goof around, and it's like everyone's like there to goof around, and no one's like, but this channel isn't for not goofing around.
We last week tried Fancy Friday, which is a very American thing. So I gave no instructions, wanted to see like how people would interpret it. I wore an eagle onesie, and we just hung out for half an hour or an hour or something. But exactly like you're saying, like give people permission to like relax a little bit, especially because I feel like with async communication, the majority of your communication is only work related, and sometimes you just need to talk about something else.
Yeah, we have a place where you can have virtual pizza parties. So it's like always someone's 5 o'clock on Friday. Family, the first family to get there will go take their family, a photo in Slack, and for the next 24 hours, like it's perpetual. 5 o'clock.
Super cool.
Yeah, someone suggested pizza and beer for us on Friday, and I was trying to figure out how we would make that work with time zones, because it's going to be Saturday by the time they're eating pizza.
That was another comment.
Nice.
That was another comment I saw. One of the remote first CEOs we interviewed said that you really need like a shipping logistics startup that can like handle like delivering the surprise packages to each person across the world, like timed. That's not happening anytime soon. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm looking at this and I see how it's like, it's playing out for software companies pretty easily, as it usually does. I guess like I still like, I don't know what the playbook would be for like a company that like right now that relies on a heavy real world component, and I think like the remote work question ultimately comes down to like all of these other changes happening in the economy. Will we still have like owned and operated factories? Will we still have like owned and operated like local business stores that are like selling goods as their main thing and not just experiences? And I guess like all of these things are happening at the same time, and it's like there is none of the things any of us do matter if the rest of that stuff doesn't also happen in some way, but the way those things will happen are not how we work, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like there's a lot of white space left to figure out. And like the whole thing about like millennials love experiences, so we're just going to go to the ice cream store to take photos or whatever, all of the headlines that you read or that I read, I guess I have a lot of questions about those. It's like, okay, we're all remote. What are we working on? What are we all doing remotely? And those are maybe bigger questions than you all can answer for me right now. But I would like to hear, like, what are the other trends that are intersecting with this that you don't know about that you're speculating on?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think it's if your output is digital, then there's no reason why you shouldn't at least consider going remote. If you're still dealing in hardware where physical components are involved, remote is going to be really difficult, or it might not make sense for your company right now. It's possible that you could still make your marketing team, your finance team, your HR team remote and scale it all the way back to just whatever the physical widget is. You just have the assembly line and you par back everything else. I could see that happening to the point where there may be a business that springs up on, we're going to build physical plants just to handle the manufacturing arm of everything else that you run remotely. So you may have 7 or 10 different companies in there manufacturing a variation of the same thing.
That's kind of what you're talking about, right, Nate?
Yeah, and isn't that how generally like fab manufacturing works now, where like, some lab, like Silicon Labs in Austin will develop the architecture and then Foxconn makes it or something like that. And it's almost, 100% automated. So
Yeah.
like the other thing I would say is these manufacturing plants probably won't have a lot of people in them to begin with in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's the...
I mean, there's already plants in Asia that run with no lights on because it's all robots. So why do you need lights if there's no humans?
I mean, if you boil it all the way down, if you can do your job on a laptop, you can do it from anywhere. Taken to its extreme, the thing that's really holding remote back from just blanketing everything is still an old school tradition based fear, micromanagement, command and control from a culture standpoint, from an organizational standpoint. I think we're well past the tools and infrastructure. Frankly, we have all the tools and infrastructure we need. The internet is fast enough. The tools that we have work reliably enough to functionally get it done. The only thing left is leadership that just understands we can treat people like adults if we train them the right way, if we help them acclimate, if we give them the space to build the right workspaces. This is kind of the new paradigm. How do you equip people to work in the world's largest office, which is the remote office, where every cubicle is vastly different from the next?
What do you... Good, sorry.
Oh, one thing on the tech side that, and I just started thinking about this recently is the use of a whiteboard to ideate and to just collaborate in that way. I'm going to have to figure out, because some of the tools out there are just really, they're hefty to set up, and there's a lot of hardware. So I just need to figure out that piece, because I'm used to, as a marketer, collaborating on whiteboards, and I think some engineering heads are as well. But that's the only piece that's missing for me from a tech perspective. But I'm sure by next week I'll have some ideas on how to do that, and possibly just writing things out versus being able to draw it.
Yeah, we become like long form written heavy for sure, but we also really like Figma recently, even though it can obviously be used for like really high end design. It kind of blew our mind the first time we were in it on a Zoom with it open, and then watching each other work like silently and understanding what you were saying just based on how the other person was working. That was pretty interesting. So I think tools like that are going to help a lot.
Cool.
Darren, I mean, you guys have just built most of your own software, right, for these sorts of things?
Yeah.
Whiteboarding.
Well, so GitLab, the product, is a DevOps platform that's delivered as a single application. But what's really cool about it is, even in marketing, we use it to manage projects and events end to end. So even when there's not actual programming code that is taking place, it's built by a remote team for asynchronous workflows. And I think that's the core of it. If you're going remote, it's really important to use tools that have a bias towards asynchronous, so that you can remove as many synchronous touch points as you possibly can. And this again goes back to culture. We build enforcing functions where meetings are really difficult here. You have to have an agenda, someone has to document it, and then someone has to document those takeaways in the respective places in the handbook. So there's like a heavy burden to a meeting, and we do it on purpose because we want it to be the last resort. So that just, the culture of the meetings ties right into the tooling and vice versa. But to Katrina's point, there are some nuances. The design team definitely has to get creative. A lot of us actually use physical whiteboards. Like, we'll have them in our office and we'll show them. The one trick is it's not very easy to, like, you can't marker on someone's whiteboard. There is a cool tool called Post.
That sounds like a
virtual. Yeah, you can.
I know somebody should build that.
I think that's going to be the next thing.
I want to write.
Is a whiteboard that you put up on your wall that's just connected to the cloud, and then
that's right.
Sync with it, and then whoever writes on it, it shows up, and then
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Give Darren a cut.
Yeah. Well, so on that note, like one of the complexities I found is just the time zones. Like, I tend to wake up earlier I mean, because like in the news cycle, right, it's like, it is 24/7, but it's like pretty much everyone in the world is like starting to fall asleep or not really waking up and at work yet, when the US, like when the American, like Canadian, Mexican West Coast is winding down. So it's like, I actually find like where you are in the world matters a lot for like the time zone. And I kind of would wonder if people would optimize for that better. I mean, I actually like being on the West Coast because I can get all of my work done with people in other parts of the world. And so by like Friday afternoons, I can really just focus on things because no one's going to be awake to bother me about anything else, right? But I don't know, how do you all deal with time zone differences? I mean, this is a reality for any office, but even more when you're working closely with people based on like skills and talents and interests globally. Like everyone's going to be in a different time zone eventually, right? If it's really re-aggregated around the individual skill sets for your company globally. So what do you do?
I think Darren alluded to, best practice is less meetings is better. So a heavy burden for a meeting for us, especially with time zones, we're in 17 different countries. And so that's a pretty common discussion of like, when can we do this? And also like you, I get up early. I kind of like that same quietness at the end of the week. And so I think it does matter. That being said, we don't impose times on anyone on the team. We're not like, you have to be working from 10 to 6 Pacific time, even if you're in Central European time. We let people set their own hours and focus on like asynchronous, get the work done type of culture. And so, again, back to Luca, he likes to stay up all night. He's up till 5 a.m. Italy time, which coincides with Pacific. It's, it's great. We have, a couple people in Nepal. They keep normal Nepal hours, and that works great too. So what ends up happening is like a 24/7 work machine. So it's like the machine is always running.
So people don't need to adjust that. I mean, there aren't enough problems where people are like constantly like getting up, at weird hours or like working later or earlier than, sort of 8-hour workday.
No, we're pretty lucky in that sense. And I think also like we plan around that accordingly. I think also we're not huge, I think Darren probably sees a lot more difficulty with that than we do. Our biggest trouble comes from like scheduling with outside people, especially if someone has to be on, in the middle of the day when Asia's asleep. That can be difficult, but we figure it out.
Yeah, to Nate's point, the toughest part is actually working with the outside world that isn't quite as hip to async, and they just want to schedule a meeting as the first touch point, and then you kind of have to deal with that. But it's interesting because at an all remote company, many of the things that are really hard for companies when you're small get easier at scale, which you would not initially think, but time zones actually get much easier at scale. So now at 1,200 people, we have so many people in so many time zones that there's almost always someone on in the next time zone over who can help move a project forward overnight, over your night. So I would say it's actually probably tougher as a small team to rip the Band-Aid off and hire someone in a time zone 12 hours away. But I would encourage you to do it, because then your next few hires can kind of fill those gaps in the time zone. And
it seems like having like remote first tools where everyone's running around their own software. I mean, what my experience as an external person trying to do business with like global companies, and as like the insight of that as well, is that like when you have a bunch of different offices around the world, you basically end up in a nightmare scheduling game of like, well, our India office can only do this time and our Egypt office can only do this time. And what you're actually trying to schedule is like 5 packages of individual meetings together, right? Which is never going to happen. And I think like that is the sort of difference between what you were, I think that's a very nice example of like customer service responses for like enterprise, where like the customers need a lot of like attention and like up to the minute care, because that's like your business, that's your core business. I don't know, Katrina, it seems like a remote first global company that's seamless, and a global company with offices in South Africa and Amsterdam and everywhere is going to have a much bigger problem. harder time like resolving how to do that. And
Yeah, it comes down to the actual job function. And so for a lot of these heads of engineering, what they end up doing is figuring out different work streams and they assign it to time zone. So that's how they kind of collaborate in that way. So, they probably wouldn't have one entire team distributed across 4 different time zones, but they think about it just within the same time zone. So like the Vancouver team, which is on the same time zone, works exactly. So that's how I've heard that it's done. But I agree with Darren, like, for the business functions, like in marketing, when I hired the first marketer externally in New York and then in London, New York and London started collaborating when I was asleep and the HQ team was asleep. And so they start filling the gaps and making it work, even in crisis management. So it's been really cool to kind of see. And we've learned a lot from that as well.
Katrina, do you have a sense of where the trends are going to go with hiring if we just assume remote continues? I mean, is Vancouver going to just become bigger and bigger as like a global remote hub for people who work in, I mean, is that going to matter anymore? Like,
and I think Darren might have touched on this. So right now we're still seeing it kind of hover in what we call secondary tech markets, where there's some of tech companies are founded out of Vancouver and Austin and things like that. But even on our platform, we're talking every day about this. Do we just open it up to anywhere and see what happens? Because in some markets where we have large customers, Boston is an example where they've just hired everyone in all of the 14 markets we're in that are willing to work for a Boston company. And so all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, what about Tulsa? What about Kansas City? What about wherever in Montana, Big Sky? I was there recently. So it'd be interesting to see. And I think the actual city will matter less because there is this trend to move just strictly to, completely distributed teams.
Well, I mean, but cities were built around work in the first place, right? So like, I mean, it really just undermines the whole point of a sort of office oriented downtown and commercial centers. And I mean, even the thing about like, one of you mentioned, like you could now move to a nicer school district. Yeah, but so can everyone else. And so like, and people can get their education online, right? So I guess the thing to me about remote is that it's not changing to impact everything else. It's changing along with the rest of the world in like unlimited crazy ways that we don't really understand yet. So my approach to remote first is like, I'm okay with some of the skeuomorphism as you were sort of talking about, trying to like take the physical experience of like the water cooler conversation and have that online or whatever, the juice box conversation. But we don't know anything else, right? Like if there are different new behaviors that we have coming, we have yet to really understand them, right? So the best we can do is try to copy with the things we liked from before. Do the rest of you, I mean, we're starting to tick down on time. Do the rest of you have thoughts on what you think the future is going to look like 5 years, not just about remote work, but how it all fits together? Because I mean, you have to think about this all the time for your businesses, right? This is how you grow or not, right? So, Darren.
Yeah,
Nate.
I'll go with that. I think it's interesting. There's kind of 2 situations to look at. If you're being thrust into a work from home environment in the here and now, and your company was never really set up for remote, so you're in that forced transition process, the copy and paste things makes a little more sense to try to stick to the rigid hours that you were already dealing with, because like you don't need any more change at once. It's like just adapting to your home as a workspace. It's plenty of change. Like we'll get to the time zone things and the async things down the road. But 5 to 10 years from now, what's going to happen is you'll look back at this moment and there will be a lot of companies that embrace this moment in time to go ahead and lay the infrastructure for what remote is going to look like in their company, instead of just kind of fumbling through it, assuming that everyone is going to go back to the office. And I think the biggest thing to come from this from a societal level is that people are going to decouple geography from work. And then the second layer of that is they're going to start to decouple identity with work. Because what you're seeing happen is people are so tied to their careers as who they are. The first thing you do when you meet someone is, hey, how are you? What do you do? They immediately go into career. It's not like I'm a father, I have a pet. It's like that is never the first thing you say. But as we decouple geography from work, it also gives you permission to think, my identity is actually in something else, and just work is something that I'm passionate about and I do as a component to life. And I do think we're moving in that direction, and this just serves as that shock to the system, that kind of reset of like, whoa, has it been too tightly woven? Are we thinking about this all wrong? That's longer term, but I definitely see that happening.
It's a good campaign speech.
Yeah, I think Darren's right on. I mean, it's an acceleration of what we've, all probably been talking about and reading for the last decade. And I think as a society like this, like you said, is a shock to the system to move us towards what, I think would inevitably happen at some point anyway. And so it's now, how do we adjust? How do we enable employees to be productive in this new world? And then also the culture of companies, they really are going to need to do some work on making sure their employees feel good and productive and not, really upset that they're working from home, because I think there are, less than ideal work scenarios. And so I think as a society, we're going to go through a pretty big refactoring, but maybe not the best time to make a prediction in the eye of the storm.
My thoughts, like actually more work-life balance, because I think, there's some schools of thought where, okay, if you work from home, maybe you just, become workaholic, but I actually think that there'll be more work-life balance because you become more integrated, your work and personal life becomes more integrated in many ways. I think the cost of living will go down for a lot of city folks. I think, Eric, you were talking about this as, people kind of move out of cities. I think we'll see more and more of that. And just really having more flexibility in terms of work hours. Nate, you mentioned this, if somebody wants to just work odd hours, they now can because they're the night owl or they're the early bird. So I'm really looking forward to this because I've always, remote work has always resonated with me. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, this is our moment in time. We get to accelerate it. And, Darren, to your point, it could get accelerated, like 5x, 10x, in the upcoming year even. So pretty exciting stuff.
Cool. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to include?
I did want to say that we're going to keep doing panels on remoteworkoutpost.com. So we're going to be, we have a few that we'll announce soon that are going to be focused on, remote work and the future of work. And so if you liked this one with these three awesome people, there will be more. Cool. I think that's it for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. My closing thought is everything that I've talked about and how GitLab does remote, we open source all of it. So go to allremote.info, dozens of guides there, including some starter guides on where to start if you've been thrust into remote suddenly.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.